Charlie Kirk got attacked by a white Charlie Kirk got attacked by a white man named Taylor Robinson, and suddenly America went silent. No discussions about white-on-white crime, no panel discussions, no community accountability meetings. Funny how that works, right? Let me tell you something that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, but comfort was never the point of truth-telling. America has a white-on-white crime problem that nobody wants to discuss, and the silence is so loud it's deafening. You see what happened to Charlie Kirk? White conservative commentator gets physically attacked by Taylor Robinson, another white man, and what do we hear? Crickets. No calls for white community leaders to address the violence in their communities. No primetime specials about white-on-white crime statistics. No demands for white fathers to step up and control their sons. But let a black person so much as look sideways at a convenience store candy bar, and suddenly it's breaking news with helicopter footage and expert analysis about the culture of crime in black communities. Let's talk about the numbers they don't want you to see, because Layla always comes with the receipts. According to FBI crime statistics, white Americans commit the majority of crimes in this country, not per capita, not proportionally, the raw numbers. We're talking about 69.4% of all arrests for violent crimes. When you break it down by specific crimes, white Americans account for 62.1% of aggravated assaults, 68.9% of SA, and 53.1% of homicides. But here's where it gets really interesting from a psychological standpoint. When white people commit crimes against other white people, which happens in about 81% of white homicide cases, nobody calls it white-on-white crime. It's just crime, just individual bad actors, just mental health issues, just anything except a systemic problem that needs community-wide intervention.
Monday.com, the opposite of any work platform we tried in the past. We tried other work management platforms, not naming names.
Meanwhile, when Black Americans, who represent 14% of the population, commit crimes, suddenly it's a cultural epidemic that requires congressional hearings and social media think pieces about personal responsibility. The cognitive dissonance is staggering, but it's not accidental. It's strategic. Let's dive deeper into the numbers that make people squirm. School shootings, you know, those weekly occurrences that have become so normalized we barely flinch anymore. Since Columbine in 1999, we've had over 350 school shootings in America. The overwhelming majority of these shooters, white males, Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech, Parkland, Uvalde, Oxford High School, Covenant School. I could keep going, but you get the picture. These aren't isolated incidents by troubled individuals. This is a pattern. This is a trend. This is, by their own definition when applied to Black communities, a cultural problem that requires immediate intervention. But watch how the narrative shifts. When a white teenager shoots up his school, we get deep dives into his mental health struggles, his family dynamics, his social media posts. We get expert psychologists explaining trauma and bullying and the pressures of modern society. We get calls for better mental health resources and anti-bullying programs. When a Black teenager gets caught with marijuana, we get lectures about personal responsibility and the breakdown of family values. The double standard is so brazen it would be comedic if it wasn't deadly serious. Here's what really gets me from a strategic standpoint. America's obsession with Black-on-Black crime is a masterclass in deflection psychology. It's like a house on fire pointing fingers at the neighbor's garden weeds while they're busy analyzing why Black communities have violence. Violence that directly correlates with decades of systematic disinvestment, discriminatory lending practices, educational apartheid, and economic exclusion. They're completely ignoring the fact that their own communities are literally imploding. Let's talk about those policies they created that manufactured Black-on-Black crime statistics, redlining that concentrated poverty, the war on drugs that turned street corners into battlefields, three strikes laws that removed fathers from homes, school-to-prison pipelines that criminalized childhood. Every single one of these policies was designed, implemented, and maintained by white legislators, white judges, white prosecutors, and white police chiefs. They created the conditions for desperation, then act shocked when desperation produces desperate actions. But here's the part that really exposes the game. While they're busy playing sociologist with Black communities, analyzing our every move like we're specimens in a lab, their own communities are drowning in opioid addiction, domestic terrorism, mass shootings, and what any honest observer would call cultural breakdown. The opioid crisis alone has unalived over 500,000 Americans, predominantly in white communities. That's more deaths than the entire Vietnam War. But instead of community accountability sessions and calls for white leadership to address the crisis, we get pharmaceutical executives testifying before Congress about addiction being a disease that requires treatment, not punishment. Interesting how addiction becomes a medical issue when it affects white suburbia, but a criminal justice issue when it affects Black inner cities. The domestic terrorism numbers are even more telling. According to the FBI, white supremacist violence accounts for the majority of domestic terrorist incidents in America. We're talking about El Paso, Pittsburgh, Charlottesville, Buffalo, systematic attacks on communities of color by white perpetrators radicalized in predominantly white spaces. But somehow, this never gets framed as white on everybody else crime that requires white community intervention. Let me break down the media psychology here because this is where it gets really strategic. When white crime happens, it gets individualized. Lone wolf, mental health crisis, isolated incident. The coverage focuses on the perpetrator's personal struggles, family background, and societal pressures that might explain their actions. When Black crime happens, it gets culturalized. Gang violence, community problem, cultural breakdown. The coverage focuses on systemic issues within Black communities that supposedly create criminal behavior. This framing isn't accidental. It's designed to maintain a narrative where white criminality is an aberration that requires understanding and treatment, while Black criminality is a predictable outcome of cultural deficiency that requires punishment and containment. The business model of American media depends on this narrative. Crime coverage drives ratings, and nothing drives ratings like reinforcing existing prejudices. A Black shoplifter gets more airtime than a white embezzler stealing millions because one reinforces comfortable stereotypes while the other challenges them. Here's where the psychological manipulation gets really sophisticated. By constantly highlighting Black crime while downplaying white crime, media creates a perception distortion that makes white Americans feel both superior and victimized simultaneously. They get to feel morally superior to Black communities while also feeling like victims of Black crime, despite statistically being more likely to be victimized by someone who looks like them. It's brilliant marketing psychology, even if it's morally bankrupt. But let's talk about what this deflection is really costing America, because the price tag is astronomical. While America obsesses over Black-on-Black crime, which affects roughly 13% of the population, they're ignoring white-on-white crime patterns that affect the majority of Americans. Mass shootings cost the economy billions in security measures, trauma counseling, and lost productivity. The opioid crisis has devastated entire regions, leaving communities economically hollow. Domestic violence in white communities, which accounts for the majority of domestic violence cases simply due to population size, costs the economy over $8 billion annually in healthcare, legal, and social services. But instead of addressing these issues with the same urgency they demand for Black communities, America chooses distraction and deflection. From a strategic standpoint, this is political malpractice of the highest order. You cannot solve problems you refuse to acknowledge, and America's refusal to address white-on-white crime is literally unaliving people and destroying communities. Here's the part that should terrify every thinking American. While you're busy pointing fingers at Black communities, your own communities are falling apart, and you don't even see it because you're too busy looking the other way. Rural white communities have higher self-demise rates than urban Black communities. White teenagers are more likely to die from gun violence at school than Black teenagers. White women are more likely to be unalived by intimate partners than Black women are to be unalived by strangers. These aren't talking points. These are facts that should demand immediate action and community intervention. But here's what really exposes the game. When Black communities started implementing their own solutions to address violence, suddenly those solutions became problems. Community policing became vigilantism. Neighborhood watches became militancy. Economic development became reverse racism. Meanwhile, when white communities implement the exact same strategies, they're called community engagement and grassroots organizing. The pattern is clear. America doesn't actually want to solve crime. It wants to maintain a narrative where Black crime justifies white supremacy, while white crime gets explained away as individual pathology. Let me address America directly here because somebody needs to have this conversation. While you're worried about us, you're imploding from within. Your schools are becoming war zones. Your children are dying from preventable overdoses. Your communities are being torn apart by domestic terrorism committed by your own people. Your families are being destroyed by violence perpetrated by people who share your zip code, your background, your culture. You cannot blame us for any of this because we're not in control. We don't run the schools, the hospitals, the courts, the police departments, the legislative bodies, or the media outlets. We don't control the policies that shape communities or the resources that determine outcomes. You are in control, and the results speak for themselves. Maybe, and I'm just thinking out loud here, maybe if you spent half the energy addressing your own crime statistics that you spend analyzing ours, you might actually solve some problems instead of just creating new ones. Maybe if you treated white-on-white crime with the same urgency you demand for black-on-black crime, those 500,000 overdose deaths might have been prevented. Maybe those school shootings would have stopped after Columbine instead of becoming a weekly occurrence. Maybe if you stopped using Black communities as a distraction from your own community breakdown, you might actually save some lives in your own neighborhoods. But that would require something America has never been good at, looking in the mirror and taking responsibility for what you see. The truth is, America's obsession with Black crime is a psychological coping mechanism to avoid dealing with white crime. It's easier to point fingers at the minority population than to confront the reality that the majority population is struggling with the same issues you claim are uniquely Black problems. Violence, addiction, family breakdown, educational failure, economic desperation. These aren't Black problems or white problems. They're American problems that manifest differently depending on resources, opportunities, and systematic treatment. But America would rather maintain comfortable lies than confront uncomfortable truths. But America would rather maintain comfortable lies than confront uncomfortable truths. Here's the bottom line from someone who sees the game clearly. America's refusal to address white-on-white crime isn't just hypocritical, it's unaliving people. You cannot ignore the majority of your crime problem while obsessing over a minority of it and expect positive outcomes. The numbers don't lie, even when the narrative does. Until America stops using Black communities as a distraction from white community problems, both communities will continue suffering from preventable violence, preventable addiction, and preventable breakdown. The choice is yours, America. You can keep pointing fingers while your house burns down, or you can grab a fire extinguisher and start putting out your own fires. But don't expect Black America to keep playing the role of your convenient distraction while you refuse to address the problems you created and the violence you ignore. We see what you're doing, and we're not buying it anymore. The question is, what are you going to do when you run out of people to blame for problems you refuse to solve? That's the conversation America doesn't want to have, but it's the conversation America desperately needs. Truth-telling was never about comfort, it was about survival. And right now, America's deflection strategy is threatening everyone's survival. Time to look in the mirror, America. The reflection and preventable breakdown. The choice is yours, America. You can keep pointing fingers while your house burns down, or you can grab a fire extinguisher and start putting out your own fires. But don't expect Black America to keep playing the role of your convenient distraction while you refuse to address the problems you created and the violence you ignore. We see what you're doing, and we're not buying it anymore. The question is, what are you going to do when you run out of people to blame for problems you refuse to solve? That's the conversation America doesn't want to have, but it's the conversation America desperately needs. Truth-telling was never about comfort, it was about survival. And right now, America's deflection strategy is threatening everyone's survival. Time to look in the mirror, America. The reflection might shock you, but it's the only way forward. This is Layla. Keeping it real when keeping it fake is literally unaliving people. Wake up.
All right, folks, once again, welcome. This is Frank. I am your host. This is the Revolutionary Repatriation Educational Lecture Series as part of WCC. I don't know, my background is kind of dark. I don't know what happened. I try to fix it, but we just got to go over it. Anyway, today's topic, right? We're going to use Senegal as the scapegoat here. Folks, you see, some of these African leaders, right, when they get to power and at the initial stage, when they speak, we don't have to put our full trust in them. And it seems that Senegal, the president, Faye, and the prime minister, Sanko, it seems that once again, they are trying to betray Africa. It seems that after Nana Akufo-Addo, the same tactics, right? Nana Akufo-Addo used, the former president of Ghana. When he came to power first, he went as a Pan-Africanist. He lied to us, right? And then later on, we saw the real lies. And it seems that the current president and the prime minister of Senegal are on the same path. You know, when they first came to power, they spoke like Africans. They never spoke like a slave or like a neo-colonialist. They spoke like Africans who were ready to take Africa to the next level, all right? To use the African resources for the Africans and the African masses. But now, it looked like the spirit of Nana Akufo-Addo have gotten into the president and the prime minister of Senegal. It seems that the Pan-African spirit have left the president of Senegal and the prime minister of Senegal. It seems that Emmanuel Macron have called them and gave them something. I don't know how to describe it. Water, food, or something, I don't know. It seems that that's a spirit that have gotten into them. Folks, as we speak right now, Senegal is not the Senegal we thought that was going to be under Faye and Prime Minister Sanko. The Senegal that we saw yesterday after Al-Assad, the Senegal that we thought was going to be the Senegal, to join the AES, to join the African masses. It is now the Senegal that is about to betray Africa to bring back France in order for France to gain its power in colonial Africa. Now, we are going to watch, not to watch, we have 2 articles, and then that will follow with 3 videos, and then we're going to analyze it as to why we are here today. Now, you see, in recent time, France have been experiencing a lot of deficits in France and even that of Europe, or the Western world, or the colonizer, or the nations, or the continents that enslave and colonize African people. You know, it is always says that one who led by the sword shall be killed by the sword too, right? Or one who killed by the sword shall be killed by the sword, right? Now, recent time France have been experiencing a lot of deficits since the AES have cut tie with France. You know, the table have turned where France is now the third world country, while Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali are now becoming the first world country. France have now turned to beggar, while Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have now become self-sufficient. France have now or are now becoming the borrower, right? The borrower, while Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali are now becoming the independent. Are you getting me? Okay. We're going to explain that later, maybe detail, for those of you who did not get that part. So, because of the issues ongoing right now in France and Europe holistically, and France have cut its spending. France have cut its spending in parliament. That is, cutting its spending. What happened? Schools depreciate, right? Funding cuts, hospital. Pay, right? Other benefits for all folks. They all lose it. So, for lack of a better word, the economy of France has actually collapsed. Not collapsing, but have actually collapsed. Now, you see, the narrative of the Western media or the Western world, they have never ever give credit to Africa. Never. They have never ever give credit to Africa. And that is understanding. And we should know that. Why would they give credit to Africa? Because if they give credit to Africa, that will put Africa in a position of understanding to say, hey, so we are the one doing this. We are the cause of the survival of the Western world. We are the cause of the survival of United States. We are the cause of the survival of France. We are the cause of the survival of Britain. We are the cause of the survival of Germany. We are the cause of the survival of these nations. So, it is understandable the reason to which, why they will not give credit to Africa. We know that now. So now, because of the situation happening in Europe and France, right, and even that of the United States. Now, we will explain a bit the reason why the United States is still standing still, unlike how we see Europe or the European, or how we see France, Great Britain, and the rest, right, are crumbling, while the United States is still kind of standing firm. You see the difference between them. I'm going to come back, right? But the difference between the US and Europe is that the US is very smart. Very smart. The US is very smart. You see, with the US, everything that they have exploited from Africa, everything that they have exploited from the Middle East, you know what they do? They know it will come a time. They know it will come a time Africa will resist. And when Africa is resisting, what's going to happen? Everything that they have been exploiting, getting for free out of the African continent, they will no longer get it. They know it will come a time the Middle East will stand firm and the Middle East will unite. The Middle East will reject the US. And what happened if they reject the US? That means everything that they have been getting from the US, everything that they have been getting from the Middle East, and every lie that have been told for people to believe, it will come to reality. So what the US do is that everything that they exploit, they steal, they take from different country, different continent, and they bring it to the US. They reserve it. They reserve it. They reserve it. Unlike Europe or France, what they have been doing, they have not been reserving it. That's the difference between the US and Europe. But that does not mean the US will not crumble. They will. Because how long will it take for those reserves to finish? 10, 15 years, it will crumble. But unlike Europe, the reason why you're seeing them fastly crumbling is because they do not have the reserve power. Now, let's go back to France. Let's go back to France, or let's go back to the media before going back to France. So you see what is going on in France and in Europe, what the media is not talking about it to give the credit to Africa, right? But rather, they are saying the reason why France is crumbling, the reason why Europe is crumbling is because of the war in Ukraine. If to say the resources that have been keeping up Europe, the entire Europe, if to say the resources that have been keeping up France was coming from Ukraine, that Russia is now holding on to it. So they are using that means to say, oh, there's a crisis in France, there's a crisis in Europe because of the war between Russia and Ukraine. But forgetting to know that Europe, they have spent billions of dollars in Ukraine. So why will it become a problem when you are spending billions of dollars to prolong the war? Who is prolonging the war, folks? We are here to correct the narrative. This is WCC. You are spending billions of dollars in Europe or in Ukraine to prolong the war. And then come back and tell people who don't understand what is happening in our region to say Europe is crumbling. If Europe is crumbling, why should you spend billions of dollars to prolong the war? Why did you tell Zelensky you do not want peace? Because once upon a time, didn't Europe tell us that Ukraine was fighting Russia for the survival of Europe? How can Ukraine be fighting Russia for the survival of Europe when Russia was the one seeking and advocating for peace, when African leaders and other world ballet leaders met with Putin and Putin agreed to cease fire in Ukraine? It was the US and Europe who vetoed it, who told Zelensky no peace agreement. So how can you come and say Ukraine was fighting for Europe or for the Western world? How? So do you see that narrative? So the Western media will come and say Europe is crumbling, Europe is falling, France is falling because of the war in Russia or Ukraine. If you are falling or crumbling because of the war in Ukraine, why can't you cease fire so that you can fall, so that you can crumble? Why can't you cease fire? Why are you spending billions of dollars in a war when you are crumbling? Why can't you spend billions of dollars in your schools, in your hospital, for your job, for your old folks, so that people will stop going on the street to protest? But that is not what is actually happening. Europe is crumbling, France is falling, or France has collapsed because of the AES nation. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Every year, France is getting $500 billion every year from Africa, from nations that speak French. $500 billion every year. So those money, those billions of dollars that they were getting every year, where you think was going? It was going in the French economy. It was going in the French, or how they call it, or healthcare system. It was going in a French or school educational facility or school system. It was going in vocational system or vocational training institution in France. Why? Africa was in dire need of healthcare. Africa was in dire need of education. Africa was in dire need of vocational training. Why that money was going to strengthen the French economy. Oh, not only that, they don't want to talk about it, but we will talk about it and let them know it is not because of the war in Ukraine that France or Europe, they are stumbling and they are falling or they are collapsing. It is not because of the war in Ukraine that 24/7 Europe citizens are protesting. It is not because of the war that is in Ukraine that France citizens are protesting to say Macron should leave in 7 days. It is not because of the war in Ukraine. I mean, the war was in Ukraine when citizens were not protesting. Because at that time, you were still exploiting the resources of Africa. The war was in Ukraine when France had a military in Africa, when citizens was not protesting because you were still exploiting Africa. That is why we always tell them, this generation of African, come and debate with us. And none of them will do it. They will watch our show with their tear eyes. They will watch our platform with their tear eyes. But they will never, ever call people who know the subject matter to debate with them. So now, because they are falling, they are crumbling, they are stumbling, and they are collapsing, what then happened? And because if it is because of the war in Ukraine, why is France going back to Africa to beg African leaders? If it is because of the war in Ukraine, why can't you go to Putin and beg Putin to cease fire? Why can't you go to Zelensky to beg Zelensky to cease fire if it is because of the war in Ukraine? But then why are you going to Africa begging African leaders in order to restore your economy? Now, these messages are wish and hope it reach to the Senegalese authority, to the Senegalese Prime Minister, Sanko, and to the Senegalese President, Faye. This is going to be your demise. This is going to be your downfall if you don't be careful. Because if you think all the Senegalese will rise against you, you will be getting it wrong. Because at the end of the day, we Africans do not see Senegal as a separate continent in Africa. Senegal is in Africa, and therefore anything that affects Senegal, it will affect the neighbor. And once it affects the neighbor, it will affect the neighbor who are neighbor to that neighbor. And once it affects the neighbor who are neighbor to that neighbor, it will also affect the neighbor who are neighbor to the other neighbor. Henceforth, we will not sit and watch Senegal to make that mistake. And we keep silent. It will not happen. So, within the course of a year, Emmanuel Macron have appointed about 4 to 5 prime ministers who were convinced, if it is because of the war in Ukraine, why are you appointing about 4 or 5 prime ministers who you have appointed to go to Africa to beg African leaders or African people so that they can restore the French or the European economy? And those leaders that you have appointed or prime minister, they all fail. And those prime ministers, none of them went to Ukraine. Those prime ministers, none of them went to Ukraine. They went to Africa. If it is Ukraine, why are you going to Africa? If it is Ukraine, why have you appointed about 4 to 5 prime ministers within a year? Here it is, folks. Because France has lost its influence in Africa, and France actually have become a terror nation. So in order for Macron to stay in power, or in order to restore France, what Macron did was Macron called Faye in France. In other words, France, if Macron wants to see Senegalese president or Faye, Macron should go to the African continent. Macron should go to Faye. But you see, psychologically, this is what it did, and this is what they keep doing to Africans' leader. You know, the West, they will sit in their Western nation, in their Western world, in their country. They are that they don't need you. But meanwhile, they need you. So what they first do is they will call you over. And that is what they did to the Senegalese president, Faye. Emmanuel Macron called him over after a recent protest, calling over to play on his mind. And then the result of that meeting, because there have been about 5 prime ministers who have gone to Africa and all have failed. So now Emmanuel Macron wants to go because he can't go to Niger, he can't go to Mali, he can't go to Burkina Faso. Now he can go to Chad. He cannot go to Chad. He can. So Senegal is his only hope right now because, first of all, billions to trillions of dollars of oil, have been discovered recently in Senegal. Adding to the already resources Senegal already have, billions to trillions of oil have been discovered in Senegal recently. So Senegal alone can reverse the French economy, can relive the French nation. So what Macron did was he called Faye. And then the result of that meeting, the understanding of that meeting, the response of that meeting from Faye will encourage Emmanuel Macron to then go by himself, or himself to then go to Senegal to sign deal. Henceforth, Senegal have betrayed Africa in order to bring back France alive, in order to bring back Europe alive. Because as we speak, since Niger drove away France and stopped the exportation of uranium, Senegal or France is in darkness. Europe in darkness. They are suffering. The street, see the street, is undescribable. So let's read the first article here. And then we will read a second article. And then we analyze it with video. Senegal has once again betrayed Africa, in order to bring back France to life. Senegal has neglected the needs of the African people in order to survive, or in order to make France to survive, to continue to subjugate and suppress the African continent and African people. Faye and Sanko, we thought they were young generational leader in this contemporary Africa to rescue the African continent along with other revolutionaries. As they spoke, but once again, Senegal have betrayed Africa in order for France and Europe to survive. So that African will be running, going to Europe to seek greener pasture. So that African will be running and dying on the sea, on the Mediterranean Sea. Because France does not want to see French people dying on the Mediterranean Sea to go to Africa. Europe does not want to see Europeans dying on the Mediterranean Sea to go to Africa to seek greener pasture. So Faye and Sanko have agreed to that. Faye and Sanko have agreed to see African people, to see Senegalese, to see Africans dying on the Mediterranean Sea and be humiliated to go to Italy and be humiliated to go to France. Yes, once again, an African leader have agreed that the only way French-speaking country citizens in Africa can get a citizenship in Africa or in France, you have to climb on a building to rescue one French citizen. You have to rescue a French citizen on a building before you can become a French citizen. Once again, an African leader have agreed to put Africans in a dilemma. Let's read the first article. Come in, folks. Let me close this door. Hold on. We're here. Let's continue now. So, let's look at the first article. This is the first article. President Faye received by President Emmanuel Macron for a working lunch. So he was called by the French president. Faye was called by the French president to eat. You know, this is how you do to the slave. You call them and sit on the table and eat with them on the table and drink with them on the table, and then they will feel that they are now equal to their slave master. If to say there are no food in France, in Senegal to eat. If to say there are no good eating place in Senegal. If to say there are no good restaurant in Senegal, but you have to be called by a French president in France to sit down to an expensive place in France and then feed you with food and then get into your head. So this is Faye. This young man that we thought was about to work along with other revolutionary leaders in Africa. But here is him, a betrayer. I think Nana Akufo-Addo's spirit have gotten into him. Because I don't think this is the Faye that spoke when he won the presidency. I don't think so. Now, let's read here. Let's read here. We may not read all, but let's read here. Or we might read all. Let's see. On the sideline of his participation in the rencontre, is a French deed, in a rencontre d'entrepreneurs de France, the president of the Republic of Senegal met this morning at the EEC with President Emmanuel Macron for a working breakfast. Let's continue. In a cardinal atmosphere, the two heads of state reviewed cooperation. Listen to this, folks. Review cooperation program and discuss strengthening the renewed partnership between Senegal and France. So Senegal is about to renew the colonial partnership with France and Senegal. Senegal is about to renew the colonial partnership with France and Senegal, because there is nothing renewable about a colonial rule. There is nothing renewable about a colonial suppression, oppression, and subjugation. There is nothing renewable about that will bring any prosperity to France, to Senegal, and the African continent holistically, or in large, or at large. Strengthening the renewed partnership between Senegal and France, particularly in the area of investment. Come on, this is a complete BS and this is a complete nonsense. What investment have France done on the African continent? In fact, not just the African continent, because there were other colonial nations that was there that they should have developed those colonial areas that they occupy. But what have France done with the 14 Francophone nations? Look at Togo. Look at Benin. Look at Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. When Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, these nations, they were among the fourth or the third poorest country in the world, with the richest, or one of the richest nations in the world, with some of the valuable resources in the world. But they were among the third, the fourth, or the second poorest country in the world. So what is renewable about this? But let's continue here. So they say, particularly in the area of investment, trade, defense, and security. Investment, trade, defense, and security. But I thought France was in Africa. I thought France was in Africa with their investment before. I thought France was in Africa with their trade deal before. I thought France was in Africa with their defense mechanism. But 24/7 terrorists. Oh, in fact, this was the reason Abraham Traore became angry. Tiani became angry. Keita became angry to remove France military and every foreign military in those regions because they were there and Boko Haram, ISIS, Al Qaeda, they were increasing on a daily numbers or on a daily basis. But let's continue here. This review of cooperation will be on the agenda of the next intergovernmental seminar scheduled for September. Let's continue here. These are all sweet words, folks. Because if you even read previous meeting between these people, even before Faye, these were the same thing they said about renewable trade investment or defense mechanism or improvement or in development technology. These were the same thing that they said in past time presidency. And nothing was done. Because Senegalese were still finding their way to Europe so that they can be soccer professional. Senegalese are still finding their way to Europe so that they can get job. And that is why today you have more Senegalese playing football in Europe. Because they have to run away. No opportunity there. They have to run away to go to Europe. They have to run away to go to France. They have to pass through desert. They have to pass through the sea. And many of them die and bury at sea. Many of them die in the desert and bury in the desert and bury at sand because they just wasted sand over their body. But let's continue here. The president of the Republic, Senegal, also commended, he praised Emmanuel Macron stands on historical membrane issues. Look, we don't need these things. These are all BS because they want to get you. We don't need praises from any European leader when they want to play on the minds of Africans masses in order to get us back. We don't need their praises. At this point of time, we don't need their praises because we already know what time it is. The president of the Republic, Commander Emmanuel Macron, stands on historical membrane issues, notably the recognition of the 1944 Tiorine massacre of Senegalese soldiers. Do you remember this 1994? It was a time Senegalese government ordered the massacre, they killed in the bombing of Senegalese army who fought in World War II alongside with France, and they became victorious. And they promised those Senegalese soldiers to pay them. But after the war, the French president, the French prime minister, they were unable to pay those soldiers. What they did, they left those soldiers on a camp and then lied to them, took their weapon from them, and then the next thing, they carried their helicopter, they carried their plane, they carried their weapons, and they slaughtered all those soldiers. Since 1994, what does praises have to do? What does remembering those days have to do with being on Emmanuel Macron's side? What is the justice? So, I rape your mother. I rape your sister for years, and I owe no regret. And it came to a point where everything I have been doing or taking from you, now you standing still, and I can no longer get it. Then I'm stuck. Then I come back. To you. I said, no, listen. I recognize the time I raped your sister. I recognize the time I raped your mother. So you know what? Let's just forget about it. Now, let's renew our friendship. Let's renew our trade deal, our development part. What's nonsense? And then you leave there and says to me, okay, I recognize that at least you have taken responsibility. No, that is not responsibility. I'm not taking responsibility, and I'm not taking responsibility. I'm only doing it because I need your resources. I'm only doing it because I want to get you back. Because what I was getting from you, I'm no longer getting it. So I'm only doing it because I want you to bring me back so that I can continue to take advantage of you. And if you give me the time and give me the chance, I will rape the next person. That is what exactly Faye is about to do to France, to bring France to Senegal, so that France will continue to rape and loot our resources. Why their soldiers come and rape our mothers and rape our sisters. And they will go back to the same why they kill those soldiers and say, yes, this is why we kill these idiots. This is why we kill these African Negroes. And today, we come by, we act like we remember the day. Just because we wanted them to accept us and they accepted us. How stupid are these African people? That is what they were saying. Fire. Let's continue here. He invited him to participate in the second edition of the commemoration scheduled for December 1st, 2025 in Dakar. So now this is what happened. So at first, Emmanuel Macron did not trust Faye to just go to Senegal. Because Emmanuel Macron does not want to travel to Senegal and then be humiliated. And then be made shame. So what he did, he called Faye first. Psychology. To psychology on him. And then based on the response and the result of that meeting, then Emmanuel Macron will now go to Senegal in December because he know he will be protected. He know deal will be made. Psychology on African people. Stupidity. So here is him right here. So that's a dinner there. Sit down here, have breakfast. Right? That's him right there. So now he feel that, oh, I'm president. Yeah. I'm sitting here with this man. These are all bullshit. Here is him right here. Here is him right here. Folks, do you see this kind of thing here? Will this man be a Pan-Africanist? These people have under the government of a Pan-Africanist to get the African masses. And then by the time they get to power, they feel that they have arrived. By the time they get to power, they feel that they have arrived. Folks, do you see why we support the military government in Africa? Do you see why we say Abraham Traore, Efemi Keita, and Tiani, they are not jointers? They are leaders of the people. Do you see this idiot call himself Senegalese president? Do you see him? Do you see him here? Here he is. Right here. Because he sees some white folks standing, saluting him, paying homage to him. He feels he has arrived. Do you see that? He feels he has arrived. Do you see that? So, folks, after this, listen to this. Because you know here, right? Sanko, the prime minister, I'm bringing out a point, all right? So listen to me, bear with me. Sanko, the prime minister, was supposed to be the president of Senegal, not Faye. In other words, Faye should have been the prime minister, not the president. Sanko was supposed to be the president of Senegal. Sanko was more forceful than Faye. Faye was working on Sanko when they were in opposition. Sanko was the most forceful and loving one that the people needed. But what happened here was, Al-Assad at that time, who was the president, because he saw the forceful nature and the support of the masses for this man called Sanko. You know how it works. And then politics played in. And then when politics played in, they arrested Sanko and imprisoned him to get him out of the political spotlight. Because at that time, Al-Assad thought if he imprisoned Sanko, Faye, who never had the people, it will enable he, Al-Assad, to win the election. But what then happened was, even after Sanko was made or was imprisoned, the people took the second options, which is Faye. And the people said Faye was working with Sanko. So we believe Faye will carry on the ideology of Sanko, even though Sanko is in jail. And then when Faye wins, Sanko will be free because he will be the government, because that's his best friend. Henceforth, the people voted for Faye. Because at the end of the day, they did not want Ouattara or how they call it, Al-Assad in. They did not want Al-Assad in. Ouattara is the president for Cote d'Ivoire, but the name kind of sound familiar. That's why. At that time, they did not want Al-Assad to even stay in power. So the best option was to go with Faye. That's how Faye became the president. And when Faye became the president, so to speak, Faye went for Sanko and brought Sanko in and then made Sanko the prime minister to work together. Now, the question then, maybe some of you may be asking is, so then if Faye did this, Faye went and met with France president Emmanuel Macron, then what is the response of Sanko, the prime minister, who had that pan-African ideology? What is the stance of Sanko? Now, I'm about to read the stand of Sanko to you. This is WCC. We do our research, make sure, put everything together, no bias or biases, and then come here. There's no opinion here. There's no opinion. Even if the day we want to go with opinion, it will still be in our interest. So I'm saying this because we want to balance the equation here. So then, if Faye went this way, and Sanko was actually the true pan-Africanist, it was not Faye, it was Sanko. If Sanko was actually the true pan-Africanist, if Sanko was the one that people love, if Sanko was the one that was in prison, if Sanko hated Western ideology, if Sanko hated Western imperialists, if Sanko hated Western democracy, if Sanko did not like Western subjugation, Western, how they call it, oppression, then what is the response of Sanko in the meeting of Faye and Emmanuel Macron? Let's see here. Now, we are about to talk to Sanko. We have spoken about Faye. We already know Faye is not on our side as African. We already know Faye have gone to France. We already know Faye is working for France, is working for the interests of France, and not for the interests of Senegal, and not for the interests of the African masses. So now, what is Sanko stand? Let's see this. Now, this is Sanko, all right? Ayaka. Africa is very interesting, man. This is Sanko right here. So Senegal unveil recovery plan to relate on domestic funding. Senegal unveil recovery plan to rely on domestic funding. Folks, let me ask this question in the first place. How can you unveil a recovery plan? And in that recovery plan, you are telling the people, the Senegalese or the African masses, that this recovery plan, right, will rely or will fully, right, be used domestically. All right? But then, you, in the same time, you are telling the people, you are going to renew. This is Sanko here, right? At the same time, you are telling the people you are going to renew the colonial policy with the same people. Is that a recovery plan? I thought recovery is supposed to be to go and get back something that once belonged to you. You recover this, you take it from the person back. But not going to renegotiate, that's not recovery. Going back to renegotiate with colonial policy, with colonial attitude, with colonial demand, that is not recovery. What Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso are doing in the AES, that is recovery. That is recovery. But what Senegal is about to do, that is not recovery. Recovery does not imply re-signing or renegotiating with colonialists. That is not recovery. Let's continue here. Now, let's read this here. This is very interesting. From the man we thought he was actually a Pan-Africanist, but this is very interesting. You see, these people have planned. That is why they've been so slow to ally with the AES nations. Because they have planned. They were just waiting for that time. Let's read. Pledge to finance 90% of initiative through domestic resources and avoid additional debt. That's the how they call it, the dot, right? That's the outline. They plan to finance 90% of initiative through domestic resources and avoid additional debt. How are you going to do this when you are renegotiating with colonial policy? This can only happen if you take the model of what is going on in the AES today. Those nations are debt-free. Those nations are debt-free. But you can say you are renegotiating with colonial policy, with IMF, with World Bank, and then you telling us you want to improve your domestic policy or resources. So all the loans that have been getting from IMF, World Bank, they did not improve. It never did it. So why are you going back? Look at what the AES nation have done. They don't need loan, and they will never need loan, and they have denied loan, and they are debt-free. But look at them. They are one of the fastest developing nations in the world, while France is collapsing. Are you not looking at that? Why are you going to rescue France? Why are you going to rescue France when it is time to rescue Africa? Let's continue. The next point is said, plan include new taxes. Look at this. Plan. Now, the new plan that they're going to sign with France, the plan include new taxes, higher fees, public spending cut, higher fees, public spending cut. How are you going to have higher fees and then public spending cut? I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't know how they're going to do that, right? But these people are out of their mind. The next door, they say, aim to reduce budget deficit to 3% by 2027 from 12% in 2024. Are you going to do that by re-signing a colonial policy, or you going to do that by looking at the model of the AES by domestically owning all your resources and taking away foreign mining company and making your resources a state-owned? As long as you do not make your resources a state-owned, you will never reduce that deficit to 3%. It will increase from 12% in 2024, as you said. It will increase before 2027. It will go to 14-15%. As long as you're renegotiating with colonial policy. Let's continue here. This is Sanko, all right? Faye went to France. Sanko left in Senegal. And this is what Sanko is saying. This is very disturbing. Be with me as we read along. Now, Senegal, Dakar, August 1st. Prime Minister Osema Sanko on Fridays unveiled a new economic recovery plan for Senegal by signing deal with France. Okay? A new economic recovery plan for Senegal, pledging to finance 90% of initiated through domestic resources and avoid additional debt. Look at it. Listen to the English. Avoid additional debt. That does not mean Senegal is going to be debt-free. That does not mean Senegal is going to be debt-free. That does not mean Senegal will not go to the IMF to take loan. So you see why renegotiating with France, with the colonialists, with the enslaver is bad. That is why you need to look at the model of the AES. Today, they are debt-free. They pay everything off because they naturally have the resources and make it state-owned. So you listen to the English. Senegal is not going to be debt-free. And that does not mean Senegal is not going to borrow money. So you see here, renegotiating the deal with France, giving back the resources to France, is not going to make Senegal a debt-free. It's going to increase. Like I said, the 3% is talking about, watch this. 2027, we're going to come back here. They say by 2027, it should be 3%, right? 2027, we are going to come back here and then tell you that debt they said it was going to decrease 3% in 2027. That debt have risen from 12% in 2024 to 16, 17, 18% in 2027. Watch, as long as you're making a deal with the IMF, with the World Bank, with the colonial, the enslaver, you will never ever benefit. You will never develop. You will never get what you want. Let's continue here. The plan aim at stabilizing the finances of a Western African nation that began producing oil. I just told you, billions to trillions of oil, dollars of oil have been discovered in Senegal. Of oil and gas last year comes with Senegal facing financial challenges and security and scrutiny over debt misreporting. Let me read this again. The plan aimed at stabilizing the finances of a West African nation that began producing oil and gas last year. Right? Now, I just understand something. That began producing oil and gas last year. Senegal is producing oil and gas. Now, is it the state of Senegal, the government of Senegal, that is producing this oil and gas, or a foreign company? Now, listen to this. Come with Senegal facing financial challenges. Why will Senegal producing oil and gas come with Senegal facing financial challenges? Folks, listen to this. Why will Senegal producing oil and gas come with financial challenges and scrutiny over debt misreporting? If Senegal is the one, if it is the state-owned company that is producing the oil and gas, why will it come with financial challenges? So are you telling me the foreign companies that have been in Senegal since record ages, taking your resources, were they reporting financial challenges in their countries as they exploit their resources? Something wrong here. This company that is producing this oil and gas, it is not a Senegalese company. It is not the government. It is foreign company. Let's continue here. Let's continue here. Let's continue here. Let me see here. There is something I want to read here. I don't want to read the whole thing. There is something I want to read here. Hopefully I see it. All right. Let's read here. So, basically, in Africa, we are saying we want one currency. We are saying Africa should have one currency. But here it is. France, or let's say Senegal, is bringing in France. So Senegal is not advocating for one currency. Because if Senegal is advocating for one currency, Senegal wouldn't be bringing France in and using the CFA, right, for their resources. Senegal wouldn't be doing that. Listen to this, what Sanko said. We have identified more than 4.6 trillion. We have identified more than 4.6 trillion CFA. France, 8.16 billion. 8.16 billion in available resources. Between 2025 and 2028. Folks, look at all these resources and look at Africa. Look at all these resources and look at Africa. The Western world says Africa is third world. Africa is poor. But look at all these resources. How can we be poor? But let's continue here. Let's continue. There is something I want you to understand. Let's continue here. We are going to analyze this. This is the WCC. Be with me. We have identified more than 4.6 trillion CFA, France, 8.16 billion United States dollar in available resources between 2025 and 2028 without increasing the state debt. Now, if so, Sanko and Faye, why are you going to France? Why are you renegotiating with France? Why can't you allow the AES? Why can't you ask the AES as to what they have done? And they are bringing all this infrastructure development, what they have done. And today, Burkina Faso is the first African nation in West Africa, right, to have a gold reserve. But France has been down. Africa has never had a gold reserve. So, how can you be signing a colonial policy and you are telling us you have all these resources and you want to minimize your debt? You cannot have all these resources and then telling us you want to minimize your debt. In fact, you should be saying we want to clear our debt and be done with these colonial nations. Me agree with me, we shouldn't even give them 5 cents. Because what they have stolen and exploited from Africa, that is not even half of it. And be with me, if I am the president or prime minister of any African country, no Western world will get any debt owed. Because first of all, I was not the one that went and took those debts. Those debt was taken by previous leader. And if they didn't pay, I am not coming into power to pay. If you have to hold them responsible, hold them responsible who were in power that took the debt. I didn't take the loan. The person that took the loan, go after them. The day I become a president or prime minister for any African nation, I will never ever talk about paying debt. Never. The same way they say they cannot pay reparation because what happened in the past, they did not do it. The killing, the humiliation, the slavery, the plantation, right? The colonizer of Africa and Kenyan African leader, they said they did not do it and they will not pay for it. So, if you can't pay for it, why should I come in power and then pay for a loan that I didn't take? I'm not going to be responsible for it. You know, the way you speak, that's how we're supposed to be speaking. The way they speak, that's how we're supposed to speak. We shouldn't speak the other way around. We should speak the way they speak. So you see this, right? So Senegal is not going to let the French CFA go away. But let's continue here. Sanko said, doing a presentation in the capital, Dakar, they plan to cut public spending and boost revenue aim to help narrow the budget deficit to 3% of GDP by 2027 from 12% in 2024. And I'm sitting here putting my face on this camera, all right, on this podcast, right, and saying that by 2027, it will never decrease to 3%. We will come here and report on it. It's never going to decrease to 3% as long you are inviting these colonialists and re-signing and renegotiating colonial policy. It will never decrease. It will increase to 15, 16, 17% by 2027. Folks, put this down today. In 2027, I assure you, we're going to report on this. I'm going to keep this particular article. Matter of fact, I'm going to copy and paste it, right, in a recording so that we can have it. When that time comes, we will pull this article out, 2027, and compare it with 2027 GDP if it have decreased to 3%. Now, he went as far as saying, its measure include merging and downsizing state institutions, which the government estimate could save around 50 billion CFA. So 2027, Senegal is still going to be using CFA. So we're talking about Africa having one currency. Senegal is telling us by 2027, they are still going to be using French currency. French currency. Folks, trust me, 2027 is not going to go to 3%. It's going to increase. Let's continue. And stopping tax expectation in certain sectors, particularly in largely untaxed. Okay, let me leave at this place. We already analyzed that. So let's go to the next point here. Let's go to the next point. This is Sanko. You see Sanko right here? This is Sanko, right? That's the prime minister. That's the Sanko right here. Now, listen to this. Taxes on tobacco will increase to 100% from 70%, while visa fees, listen to this, while visa fees will be introduced for visitor from non-African country and African state. From non-African country, visa fees will increase for visitor of non-African country and African state that require visa. From non-African country and African state that require visa. While Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, the AES, are having one passport, are trying to have one currency, and are saying visa free from all African states, from all African nations. Senegal is saying visa fees will increase from non-African state or African country to African state. For non-African state to an African state, visa fees will increase. So that means even if you are in Africa and you go into Senegal, you have to pay visa fees, and the visa fee will be high. You will pay the same amount as non-African countries will pay. Folks, Senegal have betrayed Africa in order to restore France. Senegal have betrayed Africa in order to restore France. Now listen to this. Sanko said visa fees are projected to generate 60 billion CFA. Visa fee are projected to generate 60 billion CFA. I thought Sanko told us why Sanko want to exploit African people. Why Sanko want to exploit African people? I mean, I ain't got a problem you charging or non-African nations have visa fee, right? Because after all, non-African nation, they charge or have visa fee. They charge or how they call it when you play DV, they charge you high and you fail and they don't refund your money, right? They charge or high taxes, right? So I mean, they speak, you speak. I don't have problem you charging a high visa fee. My problem is you charging African nations have visa fees as the same as non-African nations, right? And then you say visa fee will be projected or will generate 60 billion CFA by 2027. How? You're going to do that, right? But you just said you have discovered more than 4.6 trillion, right? CFA, 8.16 billion in available resources, right? In available resources. And then Sanko, then you want to rob Africans, right? You want to rob Africans through visa by generating 60 billion. How many of French citizens actually going to Senegal? If only French government are looting the Senegalese oil and the Senegalese resources and improving their French country, why will French citizens want to leave France and go to Senegal? Why will French citizens want to leave France and go to Senegal? When after you have bring back their economy and their economy now start booming, why would they want to leave France to go to Senegal to look for greener pasture? So that means how many of French citizens will go to Senegal that you will generate this 60 billion? How many of French citizens will go to Senegal that you will generate this 60 billion? You see, these people are like their economies. They are not. You will never generate this 60 billion as long the French economy is not struggling, as long the French economy have not collapsed. You will never generate this 60 billion. You will only generate this 60 billion if the French economy collapse, if European economy collapse, and then you use your 8.16 billion available resources and improve and build Senegal. Then the French citizens will come to Senegal to seek for greener pasture. The British or the European citizens will go to Senegal to seek for greener pasture. And then in this scenario, you will generate this 60 billion CFA in visa fees. But other than that, you will never generate this 60 billion CFA as long you have breath the French economy, where they will no longer be protesting, where they will no longer be called a third world country, because as we speak, they are third world, right? You will never generate this. Never. Folks, I'm telling you, 2027, we're going to come back here. The projection these men have made, right, by projecting that 2027 it will decrease from 12% in 2024 to 3% in 2027 GDP, gross domestic product. That's lie. It will never happen. And this 60 billion CFA, it will never be generated as long the French economy is not crumbling. As long the European economies are not crumbling, you will never ever generate this, because French will not come to Senegal that you will raise visa fee from them. The European will not come there that you will raise visa fee from them. It will never happen, because if you really break their economy their citizens will feel comfortable and they will decide to stay in France. They will not come to Senegal to see greener pasture. Let's continue here. I'm not an economist, but the little thing that I did in class, I can apply it. Let's continue here. This is Sanko. So in all war, Sanko have already agreed to Faye to renegotiate with France on how to call it colonial policy in Senegal. Let's continue. These guys have betrayed Africa. These guys, they are betrayers. These young folks, they are young. Look at him. Young men in their 30s. Both of them. But they have betrayed Africa. Let's continue here. Let's continue here. There is something I want to show you here. And I think that will be it. Then we'll go to the video to analyze the video. There is something I want to show you here. Hopefully I see it. If I can't see it, then we will have to go, because I don't want to. But there is something I didn't want to leave out. I wanted to read so you can see here. Let me see here. What the journalist is saying here. Let me see what she's writing here. Look at all of Monzugu. Look at this Monzugu here. You see? They are all in Africa. There's Monzugu. Look, she said, based in Senegal, Dakar. Iron reporter. Let's say Iron report on political and economic news in West and Central Africa. Report on economic news in West and Central Africa. These are the people, these are the Western Mungu that are in Africa, reporting on Western narrative to preserve, to restore their colonial, how they call it, behavior in Africa. Who cares about you? What are you in Africa or Central Africa reporting on politics? They are the one lying. But that's not what I want to talk about. There is something here. Oh gosh. I don't know. If I can see it, then we have to go because time is running out. But I didn't want to leave it out. Senegal will also seek external partner to recycle existing assets and continue to mobilize resources on domestic. No, let me see here. Okay, now I have found it. Right? So listen to what Sanko said. This is very, very interesting. Very, very interesting and discouraging. Interesting at the same time, discouraging. Now, Sanko said the government of Senegal expect to raise 884 billion CFA francs from the renegotiation. Did you see that? Senegal is expected to raise 884 billion CFA francs from the renegotiation of contracts. Particularly in the oil and mining sector. What does that mean? They are going to give contracts to France, the oil to France, the mining sector to France. Oh boy. Boy. What is wrong with Faye and Sanko? What is wrong? We are saying young leader, young African should take the mantle and lead out the old folks. But here it is. These are two young generational contemporary Africans. Sanko said they will be renegotiating contracts. They will be renegotiating contracts with the colonial, with France, particularly in the oil and mining sector. And in addition, 200 billion CFA from the renewal of telecom lesson for France, because everything they're talking about here is France, because it's France that they had this deal with. They are not renewing with Russia. No, they are not renewing with France. I mean, with China. No, they are renewing with Senegal. All right. So, folks, do you see what is going on? So after Faye met with France, Macron in France, right? Faye then went back home and convinced Sanko. And I believe before he even convinced Sanko, or before even Faye went to France, Emmanuel Macron has spoken on phone, I believe so, I want to believe so, has spoken on phone to these two young leaders and convinced them. And Faye went. Sanko left back. And then Sanko then gave this report after they have spoken with their slave master. Folks, we have two slaves in power who are currently leading Senegal, allowing the colonial master, their colonial master, to come in to overtake our resources and to overtake and to renegotiate contract with them, give it to them. And then you say by 2027, you're going to have 3% of GDP, right? We will decrease from 12% in 2024 to 3%. How's that going to happen? When you're giving your oil, your mineral, your resources back to France. How's that going to happen when you are reserving the French currency? You don't have your own currency. How's that going to happen when you are selling your resources in French currency? You are going to rebirth the French economy. You don't have your own currency. How that going to happen? You don't own a currency. Your resources is going to be sold in French currency. And in fact, France is the one going to be selling it to other leaders, or to other nations. Because France is the one that is going to mine your oil. France is the one that is going to mine your oil resources and then sell it in French currency. So France is the leader of Senegal. Once again, folks, we have two young African leaders that we thought were coming to liberate Africa. But again, they have betrayed Africa to reserve France, to rebirth Europe. Now, let's see some of the reason why the French government have taken this approach. Let's see here. And these leaders have agreed to it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to History and Legacy Africa. I bring you a serious update on what is going on in France right now. For the first time in modern history, the citizens of France have given their president, Emmanuel Macron, an ultimatum: 7 days, 1 week only, to answer their demands or to step down from power. The people of France have spoken clearly, and they demand 3 things. First, they want Macron to stop wasting his energy on international politics, especially on the endless case of Russia and Ukraine, and instead turn his eyes to France itself. They are tired of seeing billions spent on foreign wars while their own hospitals close, while their factories die, while their children starve. Second, they demand the government cut its expenses, abandon the lavish lifestyle of elites, and reflect the true state of the economy.
So think of it as like a TV ad with a catalog component where I can choose on the Roku app and immediately.
They are angry that ministers live in luxury while ordinary citizens struggle with frozen pensions, high bills, and empty pockets. Third, they demand that France strike a peace deal with the Sahel nations and reopen business negotiations. Without uranium from Niger, France's electricity is collapsing, businesses are dying, and the City of Light is growing darker every day. The people know that unless France repairs ties with the Sahel, the nation will remain in crisis. These are the three demands, and if Macron refuses, the people say he has 1 week to step down. The streets of Paris, Lyon, Marseille, Bordeaux, and Nantes are filled with fire and smoke. Protesters march every day, blocking roads, clashing with police, destroying properties, and chanting in one voice, "Macron must listen or Macron must go." This is not a small protest. This is not a gentle complaint. This is an uprising with a deadline. The anger is deep. It is not only about pensions or wages. It is about survival. France is drowning in debt, over 3.3 trillion euros. Its deficit is 5.8% of GDP, far beyond the EU limit. Unemployment is rising, companies are leaving, protests are spreading. The people fear that their nation is falling into the shadow of a third world country, a place they once mocked Africans for, but now resemble. They know the truth. Without Africa, France is weak. Without Niger's uranium, without Mali's gold, without Burkina Faso's cotton, the empire cannot survive. And now the Sahel is allied with Russia, building a future without Paris. This is why the people are desperate. This is why they are shouting louder than ever. And what of Africa? For now, the Sahel leaders are quiet. They watch the protests in France like hunters watching a wounded lion. They have nothing to say, for their silence speaks louder than words. They have already declared independence, already cut the chains, already chosen Russia as a friend. Will they ever accept France back at their table? This is the question everyone is asking in France right now. Brothers and sisters, history is repeating itself. Once, Africa rose and demanded freedom from France, and Paris ignored the cries until revolts broke its power. Today, it is the French people themselves rising, demanding justice, demanding survival. The empire that built itself on Africa's suffering is now tasting the same fire at home. The deadline has been set. The clock is ticking. Macron has 1 week. Brothers and sisters, walk with me through the streets of France today, and you will not see the proud Paris of postcards, the romantic city of lights and perfumes. No, you will see smoke rising from burning cars, broken glass shining on the roads, barricades built from trash bins, and crowds of citizens shouting louder than the sirens of police. The people are everywhere. Workers, students, retirees, mothers, fathers, the young and the old, all marching side by side. Their voices thunder through the boulevards. Macron démissionne. Macron resign. The police are on the streets in full armor, shields raised, batons in hand, water cannons rolling, tear gas grenades ready. But no matter how many tear gas canisters explode, no matter how many rubber bullets are fired, the protesters refuse to run. They cover their faces, lock arms, and march forward. In Lyon, protesters lit fire to government buildings. In Marseille, they blocked highways and train stations. In Bordeaux, they stormed offices of ministries. In Paris itself, the Champs-Élysées has turned into a battlefield, with fire and smoke filling the air. It is no longer a protest, it is a war between the people and the state. The anger is heavy, and the voices are clear. A worker in Marseille shouts, "We are starving while Macron sends money to Ukraine." An old woman in Lyon cries, "They froze my pension. I worked all my life, and now I cannot eat." A student in Paris holds a banner saying, "No jobs, no future. Macron must go." These voices are not whispers, they are thunder, and they are joined by millions. The protesters remind Macron of their 3 demands. First, stop spending France's energy on Ukraine and Russia and focus on France. They say, "We do not care about NATO, we care about bread." Second, cut government spending, end the lavish life of elites. They shout, "We suffer while you drink wine in palaces." Enough. Third, make peace with the Sahel and bring back the uranium. Because without electricity, France will remain in darkness. The protesters chant, "Talk to Africa, not to America." Without Africa, France dies. These demands are written on banners, painted on walls, shouted in marches. They are no longer suggestions. They are conditions. The government is panicking.
Okay, due to time, right? I take that out. But you have seen it, right? So it's Africa. And then what is Senegal doing? What is Senegal doing? This is Africa. And this is what the people are saying in France. But mainstream media will not talk about this. What they will say, oh, Europe is crumbling, Europe is falling because of the war in Ukraine and Russia. Russia is the cause, Russia is this. They are not talking about their fault in Africa. Because they will never say the good of Africa. They will never say it is because of Africa that they are surviving. They will not say it. And this is why hey, some of us, when we see these African leaders acting stupid. While we're Senegal, while we're Faye and Sanko, why are they acting stupid? Why?
Is from France, where President Macron is grappling with another crisis.
Brothers and sisters of the African continent, and friends across the world, welcome once again to Voice of Africa, the channel where Africa's light shines brightly and where the stories of justice, struggle, and change are told with honesty. Today, we turn our eyes to Europe, to France, a country once seen as the heart of stability in the European Union, but now caught in waves of anger, protest, and deep political uncertainty. What is happening in France is not just a story of marches and slogans. It is a sign of a society confronting economic pain, political instability, and the demand of ordinary citizens to be heard. On September 10, 2025, France witnessed the rise of what protesters themselves called bloquons tout, block everything. The phrase became both a call to action and a reflection of their strategy, shutting down streets, blocking transport, and making the country grind to a halt until their voices could no longer be ignored. At the heart of their anger lies the government's proposed 2026 budget, which included planned public spending cuts of 43.8 billion euros. According to the Washington Post, this was the spark that lit the fire. For many citizens, after years of inflation, frozen pensions, and rising costs of living, the idea of further austerity felt like a betrayal. Instead of relief, they were told to accept more sacrifices. Across cities like Paris, Lyon, Marseille, and Bordeaux, the protests spread rapidly. Trash bins burned, roads were blocked, and in some places, clashes broke out with police. The Associated Press reported that demonstrators disrupted train lines and blocked highways, determined to show that their discontent could not be brushed aside as just another wave of disapproval. While protests raged in the streets, chaos also unfolded in France's political institutions. Just days before the protests, Prime Minister François Bayroul's government collapsed after losing a no-confidence vote in Parliament. This was not the first collapse. In fact, France had seen 4 governments fall in just 14 months.
Sébastien Lecornu has been sworn in as France's new Prime Minister. These are the pictures of Mr. Lecornu at the official handover ceremony with his predecessor, François Bayrou, who resigned yesterday on Tuesday after losing a vote of confidence. Mr. Lecornu becomes France's 5th Prime Minister in less than 2 years.
A sign of how unstable its political landscape had become. President Emmanuel Macron responded by appointing a new prime minister, Sébastien Lecornu, a loyal ally. Yet, as the Times of London noted, Lecornu's first day in office was overshadowed by mass protests. The new prime minister could not even begin his work without facing the reality of nationwide anger. The Guardian highlighted how these demonstrations brought together diverse groups: teachers, railway workers, students, and even former Yellow Vest protesters. This was not just one sector of society protesting, but many different voices uniting around a single message: that the French government had lost touch with the struggles of its people.
We are unhappy with the current system. We want wealth to be shared among everyone. We are fed up with the richest people profiting. We want Mr. Macron to resign.
Imagine being able to build anything just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44.
The demands of the protesters are not framed as an ultimatum of 1 week, as some reports may exaggerate, but they are nevertheless powerful and urgent. From the voices on the streets, 3 central themes emerge. Protesters reject the harsh spending cuts planned in the 2026 budget. They argue that ordinary citizens cannot bear further reductions in healthcare, pensions, education, and public services when they already face economic hardship. Rising energy prices, high food costs, and frozen pensions have made daily life increasingly difficult. Protesters demand a government that protects the elderly, secures jobs for the youth, and ensures that working families can live with dignity. Many citizens feel that successive governments, including Macron's, have governed with arrogance, failing to listen to public concerns. Chants of Macron démission, Macron resign, reflect a growing loss of faith in leadership. These demands are grounded in lived experience. The Guardian described how a teacher at a barricade in Lyon explained that she could no longer afford basic costs of living, while a student in Paris spoke of graduating with little hope for employment. Pensioners, too, marched with banners denouncing frozen benefits. Their grievances are not abstract. They are about survival. The roots of these protests lie deeper than a single budget. France's economy has been under strain for years, carrying a national debt that now exceeds 3 trillion euros. According to Reuters, the deficit is projected to remain well above the European Union's recommended limit, raising fears about long-term sustainability.
I mentioned the housing crisis in Paris. That's really important, but also in the whole of France. There's the ecological crisis. There's a lot of problem with...
Meanwhile, unemployment, particularly among young people, is a growing concern. Factories have closed, some businesses have moved operations abroad, and public confidence in France's economic direction has weakened. For many French citizens, the promise of stability and prosperity feels like it has slipped away. Energy costs have also added fuel to public anger. France, long reliant on nuclear power, has faced higher energy bills as global supplies fluctuate. While not collapsing, as some rumors suggest, the rising price of electricity has hit households and industries hard, leaving many feeling abandoned by leaders.
So you see that, right? So you see that relates to the AES. So you see after the AES. So you see what happened. Holistically, you see what happened when African people are saying bye-bye to the enslaver, bye-bye to the colonizer. When African people are saying, you say we are poor, we are insignificant, we are shithole, we are terror. Now, we want to turn our continent, our nation, to a developed country. We don't want you to call us shithole. Now, they say African leaders, their IQ in leadership are low. They don't have good IQ when it comes to leadership. These are the same people that said, if Africa have a veto power on the United Nations will become dysfunctional because African leaders are dysfunctional in their leadership. They cannot manage their continent because European leaders come and fool African leaders. European leaders come and lie to African leaders. After all these decades of years, right? These centuries of years, these European leaders, their missionary, their organization, their churches have come and lied to Africans, right? And then in their lies, they put Africa in a shithole countries. In their lie, they put African in a third world country. In their lies, they destroy good African leaders. But yet they stay. When they come to us, we still give them the avenue. That is why they say Africans are shithole. That is why they say when Africa have a veto power on the United Nations will become dysfunctional because they know what they have done to Africans over the years, over centuries. Had it been the other way around, that Africans were the one that did it to them, under no circumstances, they will still sign deal with us. Under no circumstances, they will still sign treaty with us. Under no circumstances, they will still be at that point while they still depend on Africa for democracy, while they still depend on Africa to make decisions for them. Under no circumstances it happen. So in their mind, we are stupid. We are shithole. The United Nations will become dysfunctional if they give us veto power because we are dysfunctional on the African continent. So now, if African people decide we don't want to be called shithole, we don't want to be called terror, we don't want to be called insignificant, we don't want your religion, we do not want your God. Your God have never done anything for us. Your religion have never done anything for us. Your democracy have never done anything for us. Your foreign policy have never done anything for us. When African people decide, we don't need Europe, we don't need America, we don't need France. This is the result of Europe, America, and France. This is Europe. That's not Africa. Folks, that picture you see is Europe. It's not Africa. That is Europe. This is what happened when African people decide that we want to take matter into our own hands. Because, folks, poverty is a business. Poverty in Africa is a business. Western influence in Africa is a business. Western missionary in Africa is a business. Western reporters in Africa is a business. Western churches in Africa is a business. Western democracy in Africa is a business. Western form of democracy in Africa is a business. Inviting Westerner in Africa during your election is a business. Proxy war in Africa is a business. Having a Western basis, Western troop in Africa is a business.
Who seem distant from their struggles. Though not the central demand of most demonstrators, foreign policy has also surfaced in the protests. Some citizens argue that France's government should focus less on international ambitions and more on domestic needs. The ongoing war in Ukraine, European defense spending, and diplomatic standoffs have been criticized by certain protest groups who believe resources should instead be directed toward schools, hospitals, and social welfare. However, it is important to note that mainstream reporting from Le Monde and AP News makes clear that the protests are primarily about austerity and domestic economic issues. Linking them solely to foreign policy neglects the larger context of rising inequality and budget cuts. What makes these protests significant is not only their scale, but also their symbolism. In Paris, barricades built from trash bins have echoed images of past uprisings in French history. In Marseille, demonstrators shut down major roads and chanted slogans calling for dignity. In Bordeaux, workers and students marched about governance, economics, and democracy. Yet today, its own people march in the streets against poverty, unemployment, and political arrogance. This moment reveals that no society is immune from the anger of its people when inequality grows too deep.
Today we're here because French people do not agree with the budget, that is the provisional budget for 2006.
If you live in a Pennsylvania zip code and have 0 DUIs in the last 5 years,
just as African citizens have risen throughout history to demand dignity and justice, so too are the French rising today to demand that their government listen. It also reveals the shifting balance between France and Africa. For centuries, France drew wealth and resources from Africa, often at Africa's expense. Now, with African nations asserting independence and control over their resources, France faces new vulnerabilities. While the current protests are not solely about Africa, they do reflect how deeply intertwined the fates of nations remain in a globalized world. Where does France go from here? Much depends on whether the government can find compromise with its citizens. If austerity continues, protests are likely to grow. If concessions are made, it may calm the streets but weaken Macron's standing with European partners. Political instability remains high, with the collapse of 4 governments in just over a year showing how fragile the system has become. For now, the Block Everything movement demonstrates the power of citizens to disrupt business as usual. It is a reminder that democracy is not only about elections, but also about accountability, and that when governments fail to listen, the people will find their own ways to be heard. Own ways, brothers and people forever. As Africa continues to shape its own path toward dignity, self-reliance, and unity, the images from France remind us of a universal truth. When governments lose touch with their people, the streets will speak. And when the streets speak, the world listens. France is at a crossroads. Whether it finds peace or plunges deeper into turmoil will depend on whether its leaders can finally turn their eyes from privilege and promises to the reality of everyday life for its citizens. Until then, the fires of protest will continue to burn, not as symbols of destruction, but as signs of a people refusing to be silent. This has been Voice of Africa. Stay with us as we continue to bring you the stories that shape our world.
All right, let's look at the next video. Let's look at the next video. Now, this is America too. So we first started the podcast wave, not only Europe, but even the US. And we gave the difference between the US and Europe, why Europe is fastly crumbling, right? But at the same time, the US is still standing, right? But I said 10, 15 years, the US also will follow. But the only reason why the US is still standing is because she have good reserve, okay, of resources she exploited from other nations. Unlike Europe, they were not really reserving it. You see it? They were not really reserving it. But the US was reserving it, at the same time, kept exploiting other people. That is why, right, the US kept putting sanctions on other people, especially African nation, weaker nation. Like last week we said, these colonial nations, they can never fight a nation that will fight back at them. Never. They fight weakest nation that will not react, nation that will not fight back. Those are the people they fight. Those are the people they sanction. They will never fight Russia. Russia will fight back. They will never fight China. China will fight back. They will never fight North Korea. North Korea will fight back because something will be destroyed. And the thing about the colonial nation that I like about them, let me be frank. The thing about the colonial nation that I like about them, they do not want anything that they have built to be destroyed. They do not want anything that they have built to be destroyed. That is why they will never fight nation that will fight back because what they have built might be destroyed. Their strength only lies on weakest nation. That is the difference. That's why the U.S. still standing. But the U.S. is going to fall. If Africa actually decide that all these nations that colonize us, that enslave us, that kill our leaders with the CIA and FBI, we do not want them. Let them stay away, and we stay away and do our thing. All of them will fall.
Any new jobs this summer. The Bureau of Labor. United States barely created any new jobs this summer. The Bureau of Labor Standards reporting the U.S. economy added only 22,000 jobs in August, less than a third of the figure most analysts expected. It is the latest in a series of increasingly grim jobs reports since Trump took office. And the deeper you look, the worse it gets. Because today, the government also revised its numbers from previous months. They said rather than gaining 14,000 jobs in June, the economy actually lost 13,000 jobs.
Iran gets together with Saudi Arabia through China. And China's taken over. And China, I heard a couple of people say, well, the dollar will never lose the dollar standard. Are they kidding? China?
This is something we've been speaking about, right? And Trump just confirmed it. Now, I just told you the reason why the United States is not yet shaking, or people are not saying it as how you see Europe, because they still have reserve. But you heard what Donald Trump said, and you heard what the reporter said, right? The common citizens of the U.S. will not see it right now, but the leaders have seen it. Now, you see the game the U.S. have been playing, and we've been saying it on this channel time with our numbers. Russia is not the problem. And they have made it seems that Russia is the boogeyman, the bad man. China is the boogeyman, the bad man. And we said it on this channel several times. All the nations that partook in enslavement, all the nations that partook in colonization of the African continent, none of them know how to compete. They do not know competition because their nations, their continent were never built on competition. America was never built on competition. Europe was never built on competition. And it was never built by them. Europe was never built by them. US was never built by them. It was built by enslaved Africans, and their economy was boomed by colonizing Africa. Europe, the same way. You see China. The Chinese economy was built by the Chinese. That's why they can compete. The Russian economy was built by the Russian. That's why they can compete. The Chinese economy is not a capitalist economy. It is a system that was produced by them for them. The Russian economy, it is a system that was produced by them for them. That is why they can compete. That is why United States cannot compete. That is why they always put sanction on you when you say no. That is why when you always go to another nation to seek alternative, the U.S. put sanction on you. You back it off with their veto power and things. They cannot compete. You heard what Donald Trump just said. Who told you the U.S. currency will not fit? It will fit. Look at China. Look at Russia. But you see, they made African people the stupidest one and the stupidest African leaders. The stupidest African people who don't read and who don't analyze. They made them to believe that if you go to Russia you'll be going to the bad side. If you go to China, you will be going to the bad side. Because China, Russia, they do not, their policies is bad. But here is the United States president is telling us now today. The message they have preached to African people, to black people, against China, against Russia, that is not it. They was trying to lie to us because the U.S. cannot compete with China. The U.S. cannot compete with Russia because of their policy. The policies of the U.S. is different from the policies of China, is different from the policies of Russia. Now, that is not to say, I am saying the Chinese policies are better or are good. That is not to say I am preaching for the Chinese. That is not to say I am preaching for the Russian. I am analyzing something here. Based on the number of times the U.S. have been on the African continent and in African nations, in black nations, and they have done nothing. Their policies have been exploitation, killing African leaders directly or indirectly, removing African leaders directly or indirectly, infiltrating African elections and manipulating African elections, making sure putting people in power that will adhere to the American foreign policy and the European foreign policy, creating proxy war that we saw in Libya, and having a plan in 5 years' time to overthrow countries, to create proxy war in countries. And today, the last nation that ever predicted, the United States government ever predicted to carry war in Sudan, and today we have war in Sudan. That is the American foreign policy, which is different from the Chinese, from the Russian. Because holistically, the Chinese foreign policy is not creating proxy war, is not killing African leaders, is not manipulating African elections. That is not to say, again, I'm speaking for them. But we see the reality going on. We see who are involved in these elections. We see who are involved in the killings of African leaders, in the demise of African leaders. We have seen who are involved in proxy war in Africa and in black nations. So now you see what Trump is saying. Let's continue here.
Lost 13,000 jobs.
Iran gets together with Saudi Arabia through China. And China's taken over. And China, I heard a couple of people say, well, the dollar will never lose the dollar standard. Are they kidding? China wants to change the standard, the currency standard. And if that happens, that's like losing a world war. We'll be a second-tier country. We'll literally be a second-tier country if that happens.
Listen, folks. You see what I love about this man? This man never shame or he never shy away from the truth. The man speak the truth. Biden will never say this. John Bush will never say this. Obama will never say this. Trump is telling us America will become a terror country. Trump is telling us the United States will become a terror country. And listen to this, folks. Do you see the power of unity? This is the reason why the US and Europe, they have never wanted for Africa to unite, to become powerful, to become one. But you see what Donald Trump said? Are you crazy? You're looking at Iran. You're looking at China. You're looking at Russia. You're looking at North Korea. These nations coming together and uniting. Do you understand our force? And this nation unite and become part of BRICS. And then you want to say the United States currency, where will it be? Then you want to talk about the United States, we lose our position, we lose our currency, we become terror. Because no nation will succumb to the US. That's why I love this man. He speaks the truth. I may not agree, we may not agree with him on some things. But Trump is telling us the US will not become a third world country. Europe will become a third world country. If the road they are taking, if black people decide and say, we are done, it is done for them. The children of the world, the beginning of time, those children are awakened. It is done for you people. Our attitude will reflect on your past and your present. Our attitude and behavior will reflect on the past and the present. And we have nothing to fear. We have nothing to lose. Because after all, we are fixing something. So if we are fixing something, we have nothing to lose.
Now you're losing Brazil. You're losing Colombia, South America. You're losing Iran. You've lost it. You've lost Russia. And if you haven't lost them yet, you're going to lose them. China's on the yuan, so China's gone. Then you see France going over. No, what's going on? We're losing. If we lose our currency, that's the equivalent of losing a world war.
If you're building a company, you need to be using RAMP. No one wants to be wasting time manually logging receipts.
Our currency is what makes us powerful and strong. And this was unthinkable during the Trump administration.
Waking up in an America where a gallon of milk costs $7, your grocery bill explodes like rent, and your dream home loses $100,000 in value overnight. Families drown in $1.1 trillion of credit card debt. Hospitals demand $10,000 before you're even treated. Tariffs slam imports with brutal price hikes, and foreign tourists, once pouring billions into our economy, are vanishing as trade wars poison America.
Imagine waking up in the heart of Washington, D.C., only to see the largest retailer in American history facing an exodus unlike anything seen before. Walmart, the symbol of U.S. economic power, the pride of American consumer culture, suddenly finds its parking lots empty, its sales collapsing, and its executives scrambling for answers. Now imagine that this exodus isn't happening because of a boycott, a pandemic, or a supply chain crisis. It is happening because millions of people are no longer convinced that Walmart is the future. They have found a better alternative, and that alternative is Africa. Yes, you heard that right, Africa, the continent once dismissed as too poor, too unstable, too dependent. Today, Africa is rising with a vengeance, and it is taking the global market by storm. From Accra to Addis Ababa, Lagos to Nairobi, African entrepreneurs are not just selling goods, they are rewriting the rules of global trade. They are producing higher quality products, building world-class logistics systems, and creating digital platforms that bypass the very middlemen that used to control global commerce. This is why millions are walking away from Walmart and other U.S. retail giants. They are tired of inflated prices, tired of poor quality, tired of being told what they can buy and at what price. African markets, by contrast, are offering something revolutionary: direct trade, fair prices, cultural authenticity, and innovation. And consumers are voting with their wallets. This is no small shift. This is a seismic event, a once-in-a-century realignment of global economic power. For decades, America built its wealth by controlling global supply chains. Walmart was the crown jewel of that strategy, using its massive purchasing power to dictate prices, control markets, and squeeze suppliers worldwide. But today, that model is collapsing. African nations are refusing to play the old game. They are building their own processing plants, their own distribution networks, and their own e-commerce platforms. And for the first time in history, they are keeping profits on African soil. Picture this: Ghanaian cocoa no longer shipped to Europe or America, but processed in state-of-the-art factories in Kumasi and Accra, turned into premium chocolate that sells in Dubai, Tokyo, and London, bypassing American retailers entirely. Nigerian textiles no longer exported as cheap cotton, but turned into fashion brands that dominate international runways. Kenyan avocados, Tanzanian cashews, South African wines, all moving through African-controlled supply chains that lock U.S. middlemen out. And the numbers are staggering. In just the past 3 years, African exports of value-added goods have skyrocketed by over 60%. Foreign direct investment into African manufacturing hubs has broken records. The African Continental Free Trade Area is creating the largest single market on Earth, with 1.4 billion people trading with each other and the world on their own terms. This is what Washington fears and what Walmart cannot stop. Because this is not just about goods and services. This is about influence, about who sets the rules of the global economy. And right now, the rules are being rewritten in Africa. The US government is already panicking. Lawmakers are calling emergency hearings, think tanks are publishing frantic reports, and corporate lobbyists are begging for new trade deals to regain access to African markets. But it may be too late. Africa has options now: China, India, Brazil, Russia, and it is using them strategically to build leverage. This is why millions leaving Walmart is such a big deal, because it's not just a story about where people shop, it's a story about where the world is headed. A world in which Africa is not a supplier of cheap raw materials, but a producer of wealth, culture, and technology that competes head-to-head with America. And here's the truth. This is only the beginning. What we are seeing is the birth of a new economic order, one that puts Africa at the center. For Walmart, for Washington, for Wall Street, this is a nightmare. But for Africa, it is a dream finally coming true. The winds of global commerce are shifting, and this time they are blowing straight toward Africa. What was once thought impossible is now unfolding right before our eyes. Millions of people are walking away from U.S. retail giants like Walmart, and they are turning their gaze to Africa's rising markets. This is not just an economic adjustment. This is not just a matter of new trade routes. This is a tectonic shift, a global rebalancing of power, wealth, and opportunity. For decades, Walmart stood as the towering symbol of U.S. consumer dominance: 11,000 stores worldwide, hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue, a giant that crushed competition and dictated supply chains. Its model was simple: sell cheap, sell everywhere, dominate markets. But something has gone terribly wrong for the American retail giant. The very consumers it relied on, not just in the U.S., but around the world, are abandoning it in droves. And they are not just abandoning Walmart, they are embracing Africa's fast-growing marketplace. Why? Because Africa is no longer the place where raw materials are shipped away and cheap products are dumped. Africa is becoming the place where wealth is created, where innovation is happening, where the future is being built. From Lagos to Nairobi, from Accra to Addis Ababa, bustling new markets are popping up, markets that are digital, modern, and surprisingly competitive. Africa's young population, over 1.3 billion people, 70% of them under the age of 30, has become the engine of a new economy that is refusing to be merely a consumer of Western goods. Instead of buying into Walmart's global machine, Africa is creating its own supply chains, its own brands, its own ecosystems. Platforms like Jumia, Takealot, and dozens of smaller competitors are transforming shopping into a homegrown revolution. They are offering local products, supporting local farmers, and building an economy that feeds itself. The result: while Walmart struggles to keep up with changing demand, Africa is surging forward, offering goods that are fresher, cheaper, and more aligned with the needs of its people. But here is where the story becomes even more interesting. This African retail revolution is not just attracting African consumers, it is attracting international buyers too. Millions of people in Europe, Asia, and even North America are now sourcing directly from African markets. They are buying African textiles, African cocoa, African coffee, African technology products, African foodstuffs, because Africa has finally decided to process its goods, package them, brand them, and sell them with pride. Think about what this means for Walmart. For years, it thrived by exploiting global supply chains that were designed to favor American corporations.
$1. Can you even trade options for $1? Yes, and you can do it right now on Robinhood.
It sourced cheap products from Asia, sold them at a markup in the West, and killed competition with its scale. But now, African producers are saying, no more middlemen. They are selling directly to consumers through e-commerce, bypassing Walmart, bypassing U.S. retailers, and keeping the profits in Africa. And the numbers are staggering. In just the past 2 years, Africa's retail e-commerce market has grown by over 40%, attracting billions in investment. African brands are going global. Ghanaian chocolate companies are setting up distribution centers in Europe. Nigerian fashion houses are winning contracts in Dubai. Kenyan horticultural exporters are using blockchain to guarantee freshness and traceability. And consumers, yes, even in the United States, are turning to these African producers because they are offering quality at prices Walmart cannot match without sacrificing its margins. This is where Washington is panicking. Because when millions of American consumers start bypassing U.S. corporations to buy directly from Africa, it's not just Walmart that takes a hit, it's the entire U.S. retail sector. Every sale that happens outside Walmart's ecosystem is a sale that doesn't contribute to America's GDP. Every dollar that flows into Africa is a dollar that does not circulate in the American economy. Multiply that by millions of transactions, and you begin to see why US economists are ringing alarm bells. The shift is so big that some analysts are calling it the Great Retail Migration. African governments are seizing the opportunity by passing new policies that favor local manufacturing, offering tax incentives to foreign companies to set up factories in Africa, and building infrastructure that makes it easier for goods to move across borders. This is why you are seeing new highways in West Africa, new railways in East Africa, and massive new ports being built with financing from China, India, and even intra-African investment funds. Meanwhile, Walmart is trying to adjust, but it is too slow. It has attempted to expand its presence in African countries, but it has struggled with regulatory challenges, supply chain costs, and fierce competition from agile local players who understand the market better. Walmart's one-size-fits-all model is collapsing in a world that now demands customization, sustainability, and cultural relevance. African consumers no longer want products that are designed for the American market and dumped on African shelves. They want goods that reflect their own culture, meet their own needs, and support their own economies. And here is the ultimate irony. The very model that made Walmart rich low prices achieved through squeezing suppliers is now its biggest weakness. African producers refuse to be squeezed. They are building cooperatives, securing better financing, and negotiating fair prices. They know that the gold, cocoa, coffee, cotton, and rare earth minerals they produce are no longer commodities to be sold at rock-bottom prices. They are the foundation of a new economic power. This is why millions are leaving Walmart behind, because Walmart represents the old order, an order where Africa was exploited. Africa's rising market represents something different, a chance to be part of a fairer, more balanced, more dignified global economy. For the first time, consumers around the world feel that by buying African, they are not just getting a product, they are supporting justice, empowerment, and economic liberation. In the streets of Accra, you can feel it. In the markets of Nairobi, you can hear it. In the factories of Addis Ababa, you can see it. Africa is no longer waiting for permission to lead. It is taking the driver's seat, and millions are following. The age of Walmart dominance is ending. The age of Africa's marketplace has begun, and let me be clear, this is only the beginning. The next decade will see Africa not just dominate raw materials, but become a manufacturing giant, a technology hub, a center for logistics, finance, and innovation. Walmart is only the first giant to fall. Many others will follow if they do not adapt to this new reality. So when you hear that millions are quitting Walmart for Africa's rising market, do not think of it as a trend. Think of it as a revolution in how we buy, how we sell, and how we think about wealth. Because the world has finally realized that Africa is not just the future, Africa is the present, and it is ready to lead. The aftershocks of millions abandoning Walmart are being felt far beyond the aisles of retail stores. This is not simply a commercial crisis, it has become a political earthquake in Washington, D.C., a financial storm on Wall Street, and a psychological reckoning for an America that once believed its retail chains were untouchable. When reports began circulating that Walmart had experienced its largest quarterly sales decline in over 2 decades, the White House was quick to dismiss it as a market correction. But behind closed doors, advisors were in panic mode. They understood something bigger was happening. This was not just about fewer Americans shopping at Walmart. This was about the collapse of a global system that kept American corporations at the center of global trade. Economists warned Congress that a silent decoupling was underway, a massive redirection of purchasing power from U.S. corporations to African producers. This redirection was not driven by charity, but by market forces. African goods were competitive, innovative, and culturally resonant. They were capturing not only African wallets, but also the wallets of millions of people in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. And that is where the fury in Washington became white hot, because the shift meant that Africa was no longer just exporting cocoa or coffee. It was exporting influence. Every time a Ghanaian cocoa brand lands on supermarket shelves in Paris or Dubai, every time a Nigerian tech company raises $200 million from international investors, every time a Kenyan avocado co-op sells directly to consumers in Shanghai without going through U.S. middlemen, America's economic leverage weakens. Walmart executives were called to testify before Congress. Senators grilled them, asking why the company had failed to maintain its dominance. Some blamed Walmart's lack of adaptation to e-commerce trends. Others blamed African trade policies. But the truth was much simpler and much more difficult for Washington to accept. America had taken Africa for granted. It assumed Africa would forever remain a supplier of cheap raw materials and a dumping ground for mass-produced goods. But that Africa no longer exists. The Africa of today has trade agreements like the African Continental Free Trade Area (AFTA), which has created the largest free trade area in the world by number of countries. That means African nations are now trading more with each other, reducing dependence on US imports and strengthening their internal markets. The result is a continent that is speaking with one voice, negotiating from a position of strength and building value chains that keep profits in Africa. And this is exactly what has Washington worried, because Walmart was more than a store. It was an instrument of US soft power. Through its vast supply chains, it shaped global production, dictated labor standards, and influenced trade policy. It made sure that American interests were always at the top of the global economic order. But with millions walking away, that leverage is crumbling. The impact is now visible in U.S. farming communities. For decades, Walmart was one of the largest buyers of American agricultural products. But as demand falls, farmers are left with surpluses they cannot sell. Soybeans, corn, and wheat are piling up in silos. Prices are crashing. Rural America, once the backbone of U.S. exports, is now facing its worst economic downturn in years, and the irony? Many of these same farmers are watching as Africa becomes a net exporter of processed foods, meaning that American supermarkets may soon have to import goods from Africa to fill their shelves. Wall Street, too, is in turmoil. Investment funds that bet heavily on Walmart's growth are taking massive losses. Hedge funds are warning their clients that the age of guaranteed American retail dominance is over. Meanwhile, private equity firms are racing to invest in African startups, hoping to ride the wave of the continent's rise. But what is truly remarkable is how ordinary consumers are responding. Millions of Americans, frustrated by high prices and poor quality in U.S. retail chains, are beginning to explore direct-to-consumer African platforms. Online marketplaces are springing up where U.S. buyers can order African products directly: Ghanaian shea butter, Ethiopian coffee, Tanzanian spices, Nigerian tech gadgets, and have them delivered in days. This is not just commerce, this is a cultural exchange that is reshaping global perceptions of Africa. Politically, the fallout is explosive. U.S. lawmakers are pushing for new trade agreements to regain access to African markets, but African leaders are not rushing to the table. They know they have leverage. They know they can demand fairer terms, higher prices, and partnerships that actually benefit their people. This is the new Africa: assertive, confident, and unwilling to be bullied. And that is why Washington is panicking, because it is no longer enough to offer aid packages or lecture African leaders about democracy. Africa now has options: China, India, Russia, Brazil, and it is playing them against each other to get the best deals. Walmart's decline is simply the most visible sign of a much deeper shift, a shift in which Africa is no longer a passive participant in the global economy but a driver of it. What comes next is even more dramatic. Analysts predict that within 5 years, African brands will dominate entire categories of the global market. Fashion, food, technology, entertainment. Africa is poised to become the cultural and commercial heartbeat of the 21st century. Walmart, once the symbol of U.S. consumer culture, will either have to completely reinvent itself or watch as its empire slowly collapses. For Africa, this is vindication. For centuries, the continent was stripped of its wealth, its people, and its dignity. Today, it is reclaiming all three. The fact that millions are choosing African markets over Walmart is not just a business decision, it is a statement. A statement that the old order is dead and a new order has arrived. This is why Washington is furious. This is why Walmart executives are sweating. This is why Wall Street is panicking. And this is why Africa is celebrating. Because what we are witnessing is not just the fall of a retailer, it is the rise of a continent. This is where we are, my friends, standing at the crossroads of history. Walmart, once the face of American retail dominance, is watching millions of its loyal customers walk away. But they aren't walking away aimlessly, they are walking toward something better. They are walking toward Africa. Toward a continent that has stopped waiting for permission, stopped exporting its dreams, and started building its own future. For decades, Africa was told that it was too poor to compete, that it should stay in its place and supply cheap raw materials, while the West built the factories, set the prices, and reaped the profits. But those days are over. Today, Africa is not just supplying the raw materials, it is refining them, branding them, and selling them back to the world at premium prices. And the world is buying. This is not just an economic story, this is a cultural revolution. When a shopper in New York chooses a Ghanaian chocolate bar over an American one, when a family in Paris buys Nigerian textiles instead of mass-produced American fashion, when millions of people choose African-grown food over U.S. agribusiness, that is not just a transaction, that is a statement, that is a vote for a fairer, freer, and more balanced world. The message to Washington and Wall Street could not be louder. The monopoly is over. Africa will no longer be exploited. Africa will no longer be lectured. Africa will no longer be left out of the table where decisions are made. Africa has built its own table and the world is coming to sit at it. So where does this leave the United States? It leaves it with a choice. America can keep fighting this wave, keep pressuring African nations, keep trying to control markets it no longer owns and watch itself grow more isolated, or it can finally recognize Africa as an equal partner, not a resource bit, and build a future based on respect, fairness, and shared prosperity. But no matter what America chooses, Africa is moving forward. The trains have left the station, the factories are running, the markets are thriving, and the people are unstoppable. The millions leaving Walmart are not just leaving a store, they are leaving a system that failed them, and they are joining a movement that is bigger than any retailer, bigger than any government, the movement of a continent rising to claim its destiny. This is the moment.
All right. Well understood. I can't even add anything. All right. Now, let's look at a short video here first. We are getting there.
Who would have thought that France was the welfare queen this whole time? As soon as Africa cut them off, nationalized their resources, and built their own social programs, the French government collapsed. But the Western media will blame their budget deficit or the way Parliament is set up. But let me tell you what's really going on. Their prime minister had proposed taking 60 billion euros from their reserves to close the budget deficit. But keep in mind that the reserves are the African gold they pillaged, and that pipeline is closing since Burkina Faso nationalized their gold and pushed them out. So when they said, let's use the reserves, all hell broke loose and the prime minister was removed. Then France had an energy crisis. 70% of its electricity comes from nuclear power or uranium. Now Western media is going to tell you the price went up because of Russia's war in Ukraine. But Niger supplies 20% of all European uranium. So when Niger told Orano, a French nuclear company, to halt all production, they disrupted France's entire energy sector. Then while they will paint Africa as the place that needs foreign aid, what we have learned about the French economy is that they've been spending money like their colonies will always be there. They have been in Africa since the 1600s. All those people, all those resources that they stole. And apparently they don't know how to manage their money. So now that there is a global push to make Western economies more conservative, Western media blames France's social programs for their budget deficit. They want to use France as a test case for why their economy should be more capitalist, more corporate run, more conservative. But the real problem is that Europe has been a welfare state for centuries, supplied by Africa and its other colonies. And we have taken away the empire subsidy. So as Africa reclaims price, policy, and production, France won't fix its books by attacking welfare. They'll either have to exchange imperialism for fair trade or crumble altogether.
Yeah, that's right. And we don't care about the outcome. The outcome of that, we don't really care. And this is the reason why we don't care about the outcome of what will happen to Europe and America. This that I'm about to show is the reason why. It's some of the reason, not the reason, but some of the reasons why we will not care for Europe to fall, for America to fall. All the nation that enslaved African, that colonized African, that systematically kill African leaders directly or indirectly with their CIA, with their FBI. All the nations that create proxy war and support terrorist activities in Africa, we will not care if they fail. And that is our dream. That is our fight. And the video I'm about to show, it is one of the reasons why we don't care. And we will not care.
Kill him. They didn't just kill him. They cut off his head and kept it in a jar for 170 years. His name was King Badu Bonsu II, ruler of the Ahanta people in what is now Ghana. In 1838, he defied Dutch colonial rule. He refused to surrender his land, his people, or his dignity. For that resistance, the Dutch executed him. But killing him wasn't enough. After his death, they cut off his head and carried it across the ocean like a war trophy. Thousands of miles from his kingdom, his head was placed in a jar inside a European medical museum. For nearly 2 centuries, his people mourned without ever knowing what happened to their king's remains. His head sat on a shelf, not as the symbol of a ruler, but as an object of curiosity. Generations of Europeans walked past, staring at him like he was nothing more than a specimen in glass. This is what colonizers called civilization. But tell me, what is civilized about severing the head of an African king and displaying it for 170 years? And then, finally, justice spoke. In 2009, after years of pressure, King Badu Bonsu II's head was returned to Ghana. His people buried him with the honor he was denied in death. But the scars of that humiliation, the centuries of silence, can never be erased. This was not just about one king. It was about an entire continent deliberately dehumanized. They didn't.
Now, this is why, right? This is one of the reasons why we will not care if the US fail, if Europe fail. All the nations that inflicted these wounds on us, we don't care about them. Because do unto others as you expect others to do unto you. Right? The tree you planted, you will harvest that fruit. This is what you call civilization. When you came, you enslaved us, you call us civilization because you were civilizing, building your wealth. You never care about the outcome of the people you enslave, you colonize, you dehumanize, you torture, you rape, you brutal, you fair to alligator, right? You put them on a breeding plantation, your governors, your presidents, federal leaders, they all have slaves that they have sex with, got them pregnant, and then sell the babies to slave owner, to slave plantation. You did all of these things. You never care about the outcome. We work on plantation day and night. You put yoke of iron on our neck so that we can't eat, we can't drink from the same crops we planted, we harvested. You treat us in this manner. Do you think when we taking back our power, we really care about how you feel? The good thing is we are not doing to you what you did to us. The good thing is we are not torturing you. We are not dehumanizing you. We are not raping your wife. We are not raping your children. We are not raping your kids. We are not doing none of those things. And we don't even want to do any of those things. And we care less to do those things because those things are not our nature. Those things are not in our human DNA like it is in yours. So we don't care if we do that. We don't even care to do those things. We don't care to bear huts, to put your women and children there, to have them as a sex slave on plantation. We don't care to do those things, and we will not do those things. All we care to do is to take back our power, to take back what belongs to us. But what you did, the inhumane you did, you will live with those guilt. We don't care, and we will not do it to you. If you want to come and live among us, yes, you can come and live among us. But what we are trying to do here is for you to continue to subjugate, to step on our neck, for you to continue to subjugate, for you to continue to loot our resources, for you to continue to take advantage of us. That is what we will not do, and that is what we are taking back. But we care less to do what you did to us. We don't care. We're not going to do those things to you. You will live with your guilt, and you will die with your guilt. And this is another reason why we will never, ever trust you in our lifetime till the end of life.
They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. I went through the Pentagon 10 days after 9/11. I went downstairs, I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. I said, well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, no. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later, I saw the same.
So even though they have not yet gotten to Africa, but you see what they do. This may just prove to you that the thing they accused Saddam Hussein of, or Saddam Hussein, it was lie. Because you see what they do? In order to come after you, right? They create a lies and they use our lies, right, to manipulate the mind of the people to believe it. They create a scenario to capitalize on our scenario. So you heard it. When somebody, I think it was George Bush, I told him, oh, we went, and then he said, have we tied Saddam Hussein to the 9/11? So you see, have we tied? Just because they tie you to an entity or to a news or to whatsoever, that doesn't mean you did it. They tie you to it to accomplish their aim. They tie you to it because they are finding a way to get to you. So you heard it. Why are we going to Iraq? Have we tied Saddam Hussein to the 9/11? You heard it clear. These people will always be these people. These people will always be these people. It is in their nature. It is in their DNA. Africans, be wise.
Same officer, I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir. He says, it's worse than that. He pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office that says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I said, is that a classified memo? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. This country was taken over by a group of people with a policy coup. This wasn't what the American people voted George Bush into office. Well, they didn't actually vote him into office, but it wasn't what many of the people who...
So you heard what he said. And today, what do we see in Sudan? You know, and some of you people will sit down and be thinking, oh, the war in Sudan, it is internal conflict. How can it be an internal conflict when you already have the United States who have predicted the war, who have said in 7 years, this is what we're going to do. And you saw that in Libya, because they said in 7 years, we make sure this country come down. And they did that in Libya. And you say Libya, how Libya is today. And they measure Sudan. And now you're saying today Sudan. How Sudan is today. So that is to tell you the proxy war in Sudan, they support it. They created a proxy war. They created a proxy war in Sudan today that we call conflict, internal conflict, or civil war. They are the people that supported it. You just heard it in the video. So they are the people that supporting it. They are the people that sending ammunition. So these are things these people do. They plan it and they do it. So why should we regret when we Africans, Black people, are finding ways for freedom to freedom? Because we know the freedom, the unity, the liberation, the unification, and the reclaiming of everything that belongs to Black people, if we have them, if we claim them, that would be the end of Europe and America. That would be the end. That would be their judgment day. That would be their judgment. That would be their judgment, and that would be our reparation. As you can see in France, trillion dollar in debt already. That is African people reparation. Because these people fail to acknowledge, not even to acknowledge, but to accept That's a byword to even use. To accept what it did to African people. In fact, they are saying slavery was good. What? They are saying slavery was good. It is only the dumpiest, the stupidest, the craziest, all the yeast of a black man who will agree that slavery was good. I'm not talking about them because it benefited them, so they will say it was good. But we African, that it did not benefit, and it have never benefited us, and it will never benefit us, we say slavery was good. It is only the dumpiest, the stupidest, the craziest, and all the yeast of an Africans will agree to say colonization was good. Colonization brought salvation to Africa. Slavery brought salvation to Africa. Slavery brought civilization to Africa. Colonization brought civilization to Africa. There is nothing about slavery that is civilized. There is nothing about colonization that is civilized. There is nothing about subjugation. There is nothing about dehumanization. There is nothing about exploitation. There is nothing about looting. There is nothing about raping that is civilized. Folks, this is today's presentation. We end here. We stop here. I will see you on Saturday and Sunday. Peace. See you tomorrow.
The white power structure, because that's all we have in America. And the white power structure today is just as much interested